I can't. I get really anxious in big groups. I heard someone say that recently. Perfectly capable person. Talking about work social they decided to skip. And I noticed something. Not what they felt, the word they used. They didn't say I get nervous in big groups. They said anxious. And then a sentence later it had become, I'm just an anxious person, really. Now I want to be careful here because this is a subject I take seriously. But once you've noticed it, you can't stop noticing it. A normal, human, passing feeling gets given a heavier word. The heavier word turns into a label. The label before long becomes an identity. And that identity starts writing the rest of your story. Deciding which rooms you'll enter, which invitations you'll accept, which version of your life is realistic. This episode is about that journey. From a sensation to a word to a script. Because I've come to believe that if we catch it early enough, a great deal of unnecessary suffering never has to get started at all. Welcome to Let's Talk About Confidence. I'm John M. Walsh. This is Season 3. It's called Nervous Not Broken. And if you join me for the first episode, you'll remember the line I want to carry through the whole season. Nervous is a sensation, broken is a conclusion. And today I want to look at what happens in between those two things. Because there's a step in the middle almost nobody pays attention to, and it's where so much of the damage can be done. The words we choose. The word you reach for to describe a feeling doesn't just report on the feeling, it shapes what that feeling becomes. And over the years, I've grown more and more convinced that one small swap, one lazy upgrade in language that we've nearly all started making, is turning ordinary nerves into something that feels like a condition. So let me say clearly right at the top what this episode is and what it is most definitely is not. What it's not, let me be very clear, because this matters more than anything else I'll say today. Clinical anxiety is real. Anxiety disorders are real. There are people listening to this who live with something genuine, persistent and exhausting. Something that turns up without a reason, that doesn't pass when the situation passes, that follows them into rooms where there's nothing to be afraid of at all, and sits in their chest at 3 a.m. for no reason. I'm not talking about that. I'm not minimising that, and nothing in this episode is a substitute for proper support. If what you experience is constant, and if it's there without a trigger, and if it's stopping you living the life you want to live, please treat that seriously and talk to someone qualified. That isn't a weakness, that is exactly the right and brave thing to do, and I'd never want a word of this episode to talk anyone out of it. What I'm talking about today is something different and far more everyday. I'm talking about ordinary, situational, healthy nervousness. The kind that arrives before a thing and leaves after the thing. The kind that's tied to something that matters to you. And I'm talking about what happens when we take that ordinary passing feeling and accidentally dress it in the language of a disorder it simply isn't. Think of this episode as a safety check. A way of catching a normal human feeling before it gets escalated by accident and by language into something it was never meant to become. Here's what I've learned. The escalation is often avoidable. If a person has the knowledge and a couple of simple tools, the nerve can stay a nerve. It doesn't have to climb. With all that said, let me show you the ladder it climbs. Here's how it tends to go, and I want you to listen for which rung you might be standing on, because most of us are standing on one without realising it. It starts with a sensation. Your heart picks up before the meeting, your stomach tightens before that party, or maybe your mouth goes a bit dry before you put your hand up. That's the ground floor, that's just nervous, and that's a body responding to that moment. Then we name it, and here's the first quiet move, the one almost nobody notices themselves making. Instead of I feel nervous, we might say I feel anxious. Now those two words sound near enough identical, but they're not, and the difference is everything. Nervous points at a moment, anxious points at a state. Nervous is something you're feeling right now. Anxious is starting to sound like something you simply are. Then comes the next rung. I get anxious. Notice what's happened. And those two small words, it's no longer this one occasion, it's a pattern now. It's a thing that happens to me regularly, predictably. We've taken a single event and turned it into a standing arrangement, a subscription. Then I have anxiety, and now it's a possession, a thing I carry around with me, almost a diagnosis, except nobody actually diagnosed it. We did it ourselves. Somewhere on the way to deciding not to go to the party. And finally, the top of the ladder, I'm an anxious person. Now it isn't a feeling, and it isn't even a pattern. It's who I am. It's an identity. And once a feeling becomes an identity, it stops waiting to be consulted. It starts making decisions on your behalf. It tells you which invitations to decline before you've even thought about them, which opportunities aren't really for people like you, which jobs not to apply for, which version of your life is the sensible, realistic one for somebody who is, after all, an anxious person. 4 small steps from a feeling that would have passed in 20 minutes if you'd left it alone, all the way to a fixed belief about the kind of person you are. And here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. At no point in that climb did anything actually change in your body. The sensation at the top of the ladder is the same sensation was at the bottom. The only thing that changed was the language. But the language built a cage, and then you moved into it. Let me make this real, because it's easy to nod along to a ladder and miss yourself standing on it. I'll change the details, but I've met versions of this person many times. A young woman, early in her career, bright, well-liked, good at the actual work. When she started, she got nervous before speaking up in meetings, the way nearly everybody does, perfectly normal. But somewhere in the first year, the way she described it to herself started to shift. She told a colleague she got anxious in meetings. The colleague, being kind, said, "Oh, me too. I've got terrible anxiety." And there was a warmth in that exchange, a sense of being understood, of belonging. So the word stuck. It felt true, because someone had agreed with it. Within a few months, she was describing herself as an anxious person. Within a year, she'd started declining to present because presenting was not really something she could do with her anxiety. She asked to be let off the projects that involved client-facing work. And here's the really heartbreaking part. She was so good. She would have been excellent at exactly the things she was now carefully steering around. Nobody had failed her. There hadn't been a breakdown, no crisis, no terrible meeting that scarred her. There had only been a feeling, an ordinary nerve, and a word that grew unchecked season by season until it had rearranged her entire career around avoiding it. That's what I mean by catching it early. If someone near the bottom of the ladder, someone had simply said to her, "You're not anxious, you're just nervous because you care about doing well, and that's normal and it passes," the whole thing might have gone differently. That sentence in the safety check, it cost nothing, and it can change the direction of a life. So why do words do this? Let me explain what happens. Because it's not stupidity, it's certainly not weakness, it's just the way the mind is built. Your brain's a meaning-making machine. It's constantly trying to explain your own experience back to you. And it does that with words and with stories. When you give a feeling a name, you're not simply labelling it the way you'd label a jar. You're telling your brain what kind of thing it is, and therefore how seriously to take it, and crucially, how long to keep it running. The difference is this: if you say, "I'm nervous because this matters to me," your brain hears something temporary and reasonable, a feeling with a clear cause and a built-in end date. It can let it go once the thing is over because the explanation contains its own finish line. But if you say, "I have anxiety," your brain hears something completely different. It hears something permanent, something clinical, a condition that lives inside you whether or not there's anything in the room to justify it. And a brain that believes you have a permanent condition behaves very differently. It stops expecting the feeling to end, because conditions don't end, they're just managed. So the feeling lingers because you've told it it's allowed to. Then there's a part that really seals the cage. Your brain goes looking for evidence of whatever you've told it is true. It's a pattern matcher, and it's loyal to your beliefs about yourself, even the unkind ones. So the moment you've decided you're an anxious person, your brain becomes a diligent little collector of proof. Every flutter, every hesitation, every entirely ordinary nerve now gets filed under the same heading. See, there it is again. More proof you were right about yourself. And the file gets thicker, and the identity gets heavier, and the cage gets sturdier, year on year. Not because there's anything wrong with you, because you told your brain a story, and your brain, trying to be helpful, set about making it true. This is why words matter so enormously. They aren't describing the weather, they're choosing it. Now, why are we doing this more now? It's a fair question. If this has always been how the mind works, why does it feel like we're doing so much more of it than we used to? Because I think we are. I see it in younger people especially, but plenty of older folks too. I include myself in the temptation. I don't say any of this to mock anyone because there's something genuinely good buried in the middle of it. The first reason is that we've become far more open about mental health, and that is, on balance, a wonderful thing. A generation or two ago, people suffered in silence, should never have had to. Men in particular were handed almost no language for their inner lives at all. And a great deal of harm comes from that silence. We talk now. We have words for our feelings that our grandparents simply didn't have. That's real progress, and I wouldn't want to undo any of that. But every good thing casts a shadow, and here's this one. The language of the clinic has leaked out into everyday life. Words that used to belong to doctors and therapists now belong to all of us, and we use them loosely. We say we're depressed when we mean we're a bit flat. We say we're traumatised when we mean we're embarrassed. We say we're OCD when we mean we like things tidy. And we say we're anxious when we mean we're nervous. Each time we borrow the weight of a serious clinical word to carry an ordinary feeling, and the ordinary feeling becomes far heavier than it ever needed to be. Second reason is that a label's genuinely comforting, and we should be honest about that rather than sniffy about it. When you say I'm an anxious person, it does three rather appealing things all at once. It explains the feeling, so it's no longer a frightening mystery. It excuses you from the thing you didn't much want to do in the first place, and nobody can argue with that. And it gives you company because there are a great many people, especially online, holding up the very same label, and there's a real warmth in belonging to that group. I understand the pull of all three, I do, but look hard at the cost of each. The explanation closes the case before you've properly examined it. So you stop looking for a kinder, truer answer. The excuse keeps you safely away from the very experiences that would have grown your confidence. And the belonging's a club whose membership fee is staying exactly as you are. To keep you in place in it, you have to keep being the thing. That's a high price for a bit of company. And the third reason, this one we keep returning to all season, we've fewer and fewer chances to find out that we're actually fine. We avoid the party, so we never learn that the party would have been okay. We message instead of calling, so the call stays frightening forever. We rehearse our identities online far more than we ever test them in real rooms with real people. And in that gap, where the testing used to happen, the labels grow unchecked. Because nothing ever comes along to contradict them, and a belief that's never tested against reality can become anything it likes. So what do we do about it? Now let me give you the skill, because understanding the ladder isn't enough on its own. You need something to actually do in the moment you feel your foot reaching for the next rung. And there are 4 tools. They're small, but they all work. First tool's the simplest, and it's just precision. Catch the word and choose a truer one. When you hear yourself about to say anxious, pause for a second and ask one quick question. Is this a feeling I'm having right now about a specific thing in front of me? Because if it is, then the accurate word isn't anxious, it's nervous. Nervous about the meeting, nervous about the call, nervous about the room. Put the cause back into the sentence and watch the feeling shrink back to its proper size. I'm anxious floats free and seems to mean everything all the time forever. I'm nervous about presenting to the board on Thursday is bounded. It's reasonable. It's got a date and a reason and an ending, and frankly, it's fair enough. Of course you're nervous. The second tool, ask what the nervousness is pointing at. We did a version of this in episode 1, but this time we'll go a bit sharper. Nervousness almost always sits directly on top of something you care about. It's caring turned up loud. So when it shows up, instead of reaching for a label to file it under, ask, what is this feeling telling me matters to me here? Nervous before a social event? It's telling that you care about being liked, about belonging, about not getting it wrong in front of people whose opinion you value. That's not a disorder. That's human. That's a human being who wants to connect with other human beings. The nervousness isn't the enemy of that wish. It's the proof of it. If you read it that way, it changes from an accusation into information. The third tool, and this is the heart of the whole thing, separates the sensation from the sentence. When the feeling arrives, notice there are actually two completely separate things going on, even though they feel like one. There's a sensation, the physical wave, the heart, the stomach, the breath, the heat in the face. And then riding on top of that, there's a sentence. Your mind is writing about the sensation. Here we go again. I'm hopeless at this. Everyone can tell I'm just an anxious person. And this is the thing to hold on to. The sensation is real and it will pass entirely on its own, usually within a minute or two, if you just leave it alone and don't feed it. The sentence is optional. And the sentence is the part that lasts, the part that does long-term damage, the part that builds the cage. So let the sensation be, let it rise and fall like weather. But get deeply suspicious of the sentence. You don't have to believe everything your mind narrates while your heart is going. A frightened mind is a creative writer, not a reliable witness. And the fourth tool, catch the identity before it sets. Listen out in your own speech in your own head for the words, I'm the kind of person who, because that little phrase is the actual sound of the cage door closing. I'm the kind of person who can't do groups. I'm not a confident person. I'm just anxious. Me. The moment you hear yourself say one of those, you've stopped describing a feeling and start describing a self. And selves are sticky. They're hard to put down once you've picked them up. So challenge it. Gently but firmly. Is that actually true, or is it just a feeling? You're a person who sometimes feels nervous in certain situations, like every other person who's ever lived. That's a far smaller thing, a far more honest thing. And this is the point, far more changeable thing. 4 tools then. Choose the truer word. Ask what the feeling is pointing at. Separate the sensation from the sentence and catch the identity before it sets. None of them cost you a penny, none of them take more than a few seconds. And the more you use them, the weaker the pull of that ladder, that next rung, becomes under your feet. Let me show you all 4 working together in a single ordinary moment, so it isn't just theory. You've been invited to a leave and do for someone at work, big group, people from departments you don't really know. Your first thought arrived fully formed, I get too anxious at those things. Now the old you accepts that sentence as a fact and sends the apology, but you've been listening to this, so instead you run the check. 201, catch the word anxious or nervous about a specific thing. It's nervous about a specific thing, a room of people I don't know well. 202, what's the point in that? It's pointing at the fact that I'd actually quite like those people to like me, that I care about belonging here. Fair enough, that's human. 203, separate the sensation from the sentence. That's a flutter in my chest, fine, that'll pass. And that's a sentence. You'll have nothing to say and everyone will see you standing alone. That sentence is not a fact. That's my mind doing its creative writing again. 204, catch the identity. I'm the kind of person who can't do these things. Am I though? Or am I a person who felt nervous at a few of them? It's the second one. It's always the second one. And so instead of an apology, you go, nervous, yeah, for sure. But you go. And whatever happens, you just refuse to add another floor, another rung. You did the safety check. It took about 10 seconds, the doorway of your own mind. Here's why all of this is worth the small effort it takes. When you call an ordinary nerve anxiety, you cast yourself as a patient. Something's wrong with you. You need to be managed, protected, handled with care, kept away from the things that set you off. It's a passive role. Things happen to you. But when you call a feeling what it honestly is, nervousness about something that matters, you cast yourself as a person face the moment. And a person face the moment has options that a patient doesn't. They can prepare, they can breathe, they can act anyway, and they can grow. They're the lead in their own story rather than the subject of someone else's case notes. That's the whole shift right there. It's the difference between I have a condition I have to build my life around and I have a feeling I can learn to work with. And here's the part that ought to be liberating. The second one isn't just more useful. In the great majority of everyday cases, for the great majority of us, it's also simply more true. You're not fragile and you're not faulty. You're not a diagnosis you handled yourself on the way out of a party that you didn't fancy. You're nervous because something matters to you, and that's completely different and a far more hopeful place to be standing. Here's an experiment for the week, just one small thing to listen out for. Catch yourself once reaching for the word anxious or an alternative like that. In your head or out loud, it makes no difference. But before it settles in and gets comfortable, ask yourself the question, am I anxious or am I nervous? Because this matters. If there's a real specific thing in front of you, swap the word, say the truer sentence out loud if you can. I'm nervous about this because it matters to me. And then just notice with curiosity whether the feeling sits a little lighter once you've named it, honestly, and given it its proper size. You're not lying to yourself by doing this. You're not doing the exact opposite. You're stopping a small untruth right at the bottom of the ladder before it has the chance to grow into a great big one at the top. That's the safety check. It takes about 3 seconds. Let me leave you with this. The words we use about ourselves are never commentary. They're instructions. Your brain's always listening. And it'll quietly set about building whatever you keep describing. Describe yourself as broken and it gets to work on the cage. Describe yourself as nervous but capable and it starts slowly to build something else. So describe yourself carefully. Be as kind and as accurate with your own inner language as you'd naturally be with a good friend. You would never tell a nervous friend the night before something that mattered to them that they were broken, or that they had a condition, or that they simply weren't the kind of person who could do this sort of thing. You'd say, of course you're nervous, it matters to you. That's exactly why you feel it. And you've got it. Try saying that to yourself. You deserve the same kindness you hand out without thinking to someone you love. Real anxiety, the clinical kind, is something else entirely, and it deserves real care and real support, and I mean that. But most of the time, for most of us, on most ordinary days, the honest word is the smaller one, and the smaller word leaves the door open. You're probably not anxious, you're probably just nervous. And there's a world of difference between the two. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Season 3. I'm John M. Walsh, and I'll see you next time.